The movie begins by showing a young woman named Stacy DeNovo running her business in downtown Chicago's pastry and bakery sector. Stacy is a talented pastry chef who has graduated from the world's leading and largest cooking school, Le Cordon Bleu, in France. After Stacy graduated, she started a bakery business with her high school boyfriend, Kevin, who has a lot of experience in the culinary field and has become the best assistant chef she has ever had. That morning, Kevin's only daughter, Olivia, tells Stacy about the invitation to a baking competition held by the Kingdom of Belgravia and suggests she participate. But Stacy said she chose not to attend the competition because she believed everyone invited to that event was in a different class from hers. Unlike the usual Stacy, who is always optimistic and ambitious since she broke up with her ex-boyfriend, Paul, she begins to change into a person who lacks confidence and is always full of consideration. However, Kevin tries to convince Stacy to take part in the competition and not miss it, which will give her a golden opportunity to show her skills in pastry in front of many people. He persuaded her to be confident in her skills and not let past trauma stop her from getting good. The next day when Stacy was walking to buy some gifts, she accidentally saw Paul walking with another woman even though they had just broken up a few weeks ago. She began to think that Paul had never taken their relationship seriously for the last 3 years, and she realized that Paul had fallen in love with another woman from the start. After seeing the incident, Stacy remembered Kevin's suggestion, asking her to move on with her life again and not focus too much on the past. Therefore, she decided to participate in a cooking competition held in the Kingdom of Belgravia while enjoying the Christmas Eve holiday in a different atmosphere. The next day when Stacy and Kevin arrived in Belgravia with Olivia, they decided to stay at an inn not far from the Belgravia Kingdom's palace, and close to the market to buy the groceries they needed for the competition later. After unpacking at the inn, they enjoyed their first day in Belgravia by walking downtown to buy supplies and accessories for Christmas Eve. While they were buying some socks at a shop, the old man who owned the shop informed them that Prince Belgravia was going to marry a beautiful princess named Margaret. When Stacy reveals that she will be entering a cooking competition at the Wembley studio in the Royal Palace, the old man informs her that they will have the chance to see her in person as Lady Margaret will be judging the competition. In the middle of the conversation, Olivia's attention is diverted after she hears a ballet show across the street. She wants to join the show considering that she has had a dream to become a ballet dancer for a long time. Then the old man informed her that the academy that held the ballet show would open a new class in the summer, and she could take the class if she wanted. The next day at Wembley Studio, Stacy accidentally meets her annoying college rival, Brianna, who participates in the competition. Brianna, who had never liked her from the start, tried to cause trouble by spilling a drink on her apron, so Stacy had to go clean her apron. Unexpectedly, when Stacy was about to wipe the drink stain off her apron, she collided with a woman with a face very similar to hers. The woman introduced herself as Lady Margaret of the Kingdom of Delacourt, and they shook hands after introducing each other. At first, they looked surprised when they realized they had very similar faces, but they didn't want to bring it up too much and assumed that it was just a coincidence. After Stacy learned that the woman in front of her was Lady Margaret, she bowed and saluted her because she knew that Margaret was the future wife of the Prince of the Kingdom of Belgravia. After learning that Stacy was a cake seller, Margaret asked her to come to her palace alone and asked her to give some advice about the cake that Margaret would prepare for her wedding day later. Hearing that, Stacy accepted the invitation with pleasure, and she would come to the palace alone as instructed by Margaret. The next day, when Stacy arrived at Belgravia Palace, Margaret introduced her to her loyal maid, who always accompanied Margaret everywhere named Donatelli. Donatelli explained that, most likely, Stacy and Margaret are distant relatives because there used to be her great-grandfather who fled from the palace and married commoners. Stacy felt that might be possible, and maybe that was why they had very similar faces, like twins. While having tea together in her room, Margaret was frank with Stacy and said her purpose in inviting her there was not to ask for a consultation about the wedding cake. She just wanted to invite Stacy to exchange identities for 2 days because she wanted to experience a normal life like ordinary people, and she would never get that opportunity after getting married. Margaret has longed for a normal life for a long time and wants to experience it at least once to live that life. At first, Stacy was hesitant to accept Margaret's offer, but after Margaret told her that she could grant her request, including entering Olivia into a summer ballet program, she accepted the offer. Moreover, Margaret's husband-to-be, Prince Edward, will be going on a business trip to Spain for the next 2 days, so Stacy can relax in the palace and enjoy the royal life she has never had. Before they exchanged identities, they exchanged information about royal life and Stacy's life in the bakery sector. They told the names of the people around them so that their secret identity would not be suspected by anyone. After all the preparations were deemed sufficient, Margaret returned to the villa where Stacy was staying, while Stacy remained in the palace and pretended to be Margaret for some time. That night when Margaret arrived at the villa, Kevin had finished decorating the room with Christmas ornaments while waiting for the arrival of the real Stacy. He felt a little surprised when he saw Stacy, who had cut her hair suddenly because so far, she rarely did something so spontaneous and unplanned. Margaret, who didn't want Kevin to feel suspicious, tried to divert their conversation and went to her room to avoid a barrage of questions from him. Meanwhile, at Belgravia Palace, Stacy is still trying to adapt to the luxurious life of a royal princess and tries to act elegant like Margaret, so people don't feel suspicious. That night, Stacy was surprised when Prince Edward knocked on her room only to say hello and goodbye before he left to run a business in Spain. She was impressed with Prince Edward, who always planned all the activities or agendas he would carry out because, according to her, a goal without a plan was only a false hope. The next morning when Stacy was having breakfast with Edward's parents, namely King George and Queen Caroline, she just heard the news that Edward would cancel his planned trip to Spain. However, he felt he had to accompany Stacy in preparing for their wedding, so that she would not be too stressed and burdened with all the preparations alone. But Stacy tried to keep her cool in front of Edward and the others, but when she found out that she had to attend a charity party with Edward later that night, she was a little surprised and started to feel nervous. Before Stacy and Edward left for the charity ball, he showed her a crown and said it was a special gift he had ordered from a renowned jeweler. Even though Stacy was still a little nervous, she couldn't hide her feeling of joy when she saw a crown that she had never imagined she could have. When Stacy was about to bring the crown that Edward had given her to her room, she accidentally ran into King George, who was secretly suspicious of Margaret's different movements than usual. Soon after, King George asked his personal servant, Frank, to keep an eye on Stacy and investigate what she was hiding. Meanwhile, Margaret found it difficult to prepare breakfast for Olivia and Kevin at the inn villa, because she had hardly cooked her own food so far. Olivia was surprised to see her attitude, which was different from usual, who at that time made a very messy kitchen and could not finish a single food menu. But Olivia didn't want to take the fake Stacy's transformation too seriously, and chose to take her out for breakfast. Unfortunately, when she was taking a jacket to her room, her cell phone suddenly rang, and Olivia accidentally saw Stacy's name on the cell phone. As a result, the curious Olivia decided to pick up the call, and Margaret was forced to tell her that she wasn't actually the real Stacy. While Margaret was having breakfast at a cafe with Olivia, Stacy called Margaret again and asked her to return to the palace because Edward had cancelled his plan to go to Spain. But she couldn't do that and said that the Belgravia Palace was under strict guard, so they had to wait for the right time to exchange identities. Soon after, Margaret quickly ended the call when she saw Kevin coming into the cafe and approaching their table. Suddenly, Olivia tells him that Stacy, who is currently with them, has become very spontaneous and no longer cares about plans. Margaret even proved all of that by taking Olivia and Kevin for a walk downtown and buying some toys for Olivia and being relaxed as if she really enjoyed the life she was living right now. When Margaret saw an old man wearing a Santa Claus costume, she decided to take Kevin and Olivia to see Santa Claus and ask for his blessings. When Olivia asked Santa Claus to give her new ballet flats and a new mother, Kevin could only be silent while coughing in surprise at her sudden request. After making her wish, Olivia invites him and Margaret to take a photo with Santa Claus as a family. In the evening, Stacy goes to a charity ball with Edward and tries to mingle with some royals who attend the party. In the middle of the conversation, she asked Queen Caroline about the charity event, but her curiosity made Queen Caroline feel uncomfortable. Edward, who realized the awkward situation, tried to lighten the mood by inviting Stacy to play the piano and dance together like couples. Then she felt very happy and enjoyed the party with joy. She almost got carried away by the romantic atmosphere at the party that night. The next day, Edward invited Stacy to go on a date by traveling around the royal forest using a horse-drawn carriage while talking together. He asks why she was so interested in last night's charity event, and she reveals that fundraising is a very noble act. However, it would be better for them if they handed over the donation money to the orphanage so they could ensure that the children at the orphanage actually received the funds. Hearing this, Edward decided to take Stacy to the orphanage in the afternoon, so that she could provide entertainment and share happiness with the children there. After she finished reading her fairy tales, Stacy told the children at the orphanage that anyone could be a princess or a prince of a kingdom as long as they still cared for one another deep down in their hearts. After the children left the hall, Stacy felt sad when she found out that the orphanage still had not bought and prepared gifts for the children, so she took the initiative to buy some toys at the toy shop with Edward. After arriving at the shop, Stacy bought up lots of toys in the store and wrapped them directly with Edward to hand them over to the children at the orphanage. He felt happy to be able to give all the Christmas gifts directly to the children and share the goodness of Christmas with all of them. Edward promised her that he would always visit the orphanage and give Christmas gifts to the children every year with her. That night, Olivia felt a little disappointed when she discovered that Margaret would return to the palace the next day, even though she was getting used to the good moments she had with Margaret. Margaret admits that she wanted to stay with Olivia a little longer, but she couldn't do that, considering that she had to fulfill her duties as a princess. After putting Olivia to sleep, Margaret approached Kevin and told him that she was very happy to be able to spend Christmas this year with them. She said that these moments will always be the most beautiful memories she has ever had and will never forget throughout her life. Shortly after, Kevin played a Christmas movie that Stacy always watches every year and gave Margaret a necklace containing a photo of them together before finally expressing his feelings for her. Margaret, who heard that, was carried away by the atmosphere and almost accepted Kevin's love. However, when she remembered that she was betrothed to another man, she apologized to Kevin and asked him to forget about her. The same thing was done by Edward when he expressed his feelings for Stacy and gave her a gold necklace that was passed down from generation to generation by his grandparents. He admitted that he initially had doubts about their engagement because the match had happened too quickly, but after spending time with her these past few days, he was increasingly convinced that she was the match destined for him. In the evening, Margaret arrives at the palace to switch identities with Stacy, and they both tell each other about their beautiful experiences with Kevin and Edward. At that moment, they began to realize that they had fallen in love with the man they were talking about, where Stacy had fallen in love with Edward while Margaret had fallen in love with Kevin. But they can't change the circumstances around them just because their feelings have changed, so they decide to return to their respective lives as they used to live before. Unbeknownst to Margaret and Stacy, Frank has been secretly watching them and snapping photos of them talking together. He was surprised to learn that Margaret had a twin sister, but he chose not to interfere and reported what he found to King George. The next morning when Frank was about to hand over the photo he got to King George, he instead met Queen Caroline, who at that time urged him to tell what he was hiding. Then he handed over a photo of Stacy and Margaret to Queen Caroline, and she finally found out about Stacy's true secret identity. Instead of feeling angry at Margaret, Queen Caroline felt relieved because their meeting had helped Edward find the person he had been waiting for. While Queen Caroline is having breakfast with Margaret and Edward, she feigns illness and asks them to stand in for her in a cooking competition judging at Wembley Studios. Margaret, who knew Stacy would be in the event, became very nervous and panicked, but in the end, she decided to attend the competition. She thought that she could not lie to her own feelings and thought that this was an opportunity to tell Edward the truth. She was frank with Edward and told him about the identity swap she had done with Stacy over the last few days. Margaret admits that she has fallen in love with another man named Kevin, and the woman that Edward really loves now is not her but Stacy. After hearing all that, they rushed to the Wembley studio to fight for their love because they knew they had found the true love they had been waiting for. On the other hand, Stacy and Kevin struggled to give their best in the cooking competition and tried to present their food as best they could in front of the judges. After going through several obstacles, they finally succeeded in winning the cooking competition, and managed to be in first place thanks to the hard work they had put in so far. As the royal representative was about to hand out the prizes to the contestants, Margaret and Edward came to the front of the stage and made Stacy feel very nervous because she thought that Edward still didn't know about the identity swap that she had done. At first, Stacy refused to come to the front of the stage, but Kevin kept pushing her, and they stepped onto the podium together. When Margaret opened her disguise in front of Kevin, he was confused by the situation and didn't expect Stacy in front of him. After that, Margaret and Edward invited Stacy and Kevin to go backstage to clear up their misunderstanding, and Margaret admitted that all of this was her idea. She explained that before her marriage to Edward, she at least wanted to experience a normal life like ordinary people in general, so she asked Stacy to switch lives for a few days. Margaret later admits that while living an ordinary life with Kevin, she realized that she had fallen in love with him and that he felt the same way. Then Edward also tries to fight for his love for Stacy and convince her to get back together and start living life together. Even though Stacy has feelings for him, she still doubts because they have only met for a few days, and she is not someone who can suddenly make big decisions in her life. Moreover, Stacy felt that a person from the common people like her was unfit to accompany a royal prince like Edward. But he reassured her that she was the person he had been looking for and that the magic of Christmas had brought them together. After Edward succeeded in persuading Stacy, he then knelt in front of her and proposed to her in front of everyone in the studio to be his life partner. Seeing the seriousness shown by Edward, Stacy decided to accept the proposal, and everyone cheered for what had happened. 1 year after Stacy and Edward had an affair as lovers, they finally held their wedding party and started their life as husband and wife. When she threw a bouquet of flowers to the visitors, Margaret managed to get the bouquet, and Kevin was very happy to know that their relationship would be one step closer than before. The moral that can be learned from this movie is, never let the past stop you from getting a better life and never miss opportunities that come in your life, because we will never know when the small decisions we make can change our lives.